The question of this vid is whether we should join the Euro and the European Armed Forces. Now, as a pro-European English nationalist, I would say that we should, because the Euro will is being held in terms of currencies. About 40% of all the currencies that are held in 2004, these are 2004 numbers, were held in euros, and that's probably higher now. Um, the also the Should we join the European armed forces? Well, there's three great big problems that we've got to solve at the moment. That's Afghanistan and Somali piracy, and also the possible threat from Russia. But I'll tell you why I believe that Russia could be an ally of the European Union, and perhaps that China is the bigger problem on the horizon. Okay, now the the signal from the Lisbon Treaty means that we'll have a president of the EU, a foreign secretary of the EU, which means that we're going to have a foreign policy for the whole European Union. Uh, why would an English nationalist support this? Well, fundamentally, I believe that England hasn't got its democratic rights. It's the majority population in Britain, um, and yet it's not represented that greatly in the Westminster Parliament, whereas it would be represented to a much greater extent if it was an independent country but within the EU. So therefore it would necessitate the federalisation of the United Kingdom rather than a breakup of the United Kingdom, which is possibly what might happen if we stay outside of the European Union. Scotland's drive is to be part of the European Union but independent from Britain, and Wales and Northern Ireland will probably follow the same suit. The reason why the Northern Ireland conflict ended was because of the intervention of Bill Clinton, and also the fact that all the countries involved, whether they were going to be completely independent or not from Westminster, the Westminster Parliament of Great Britain, were still going to be in the European Union. Therefore, the necessity to fight one another evaporated. Also, if we join the euro, it will probably mean that because of Britain's massive financial power, that it will tip the scales that the euro in favour of the euro becoming the world's reserve currency. That will knock the dollar off of its perch, and therefore when people use the reserve currency, they therefore have to pay in for our essentially, when people use a reserve currency, they have to convert their currencies into it to pay off our debt, and that's what's been funding American consumerism for many decades now, since the end of the Second World War. We've only just paid off the debt that we owed the Americans for saving us during the Second World War, although you could say that the Soviet Union actually did the most fighting against the Germans, or the Nazis I should say, during the Second World War, in that they lost most of the Germans who were killed in the Second World War were killed in Russia. Now, that brings us to the end of the Second World War, and also then on to the Cold War. Once the Cold War ended, because the Soviet Union bankrupted itself by producing too many weapons, what Gorbachev wanted Bush and Reagan to do was to have a common European security framework, which would mean that Russia would be consulted whenever NATO moved east, and that we would be giving them economic aid. Now, if Britain was to join a European armed forces, that would be something that would maybe set the Russians more at ease rather than having Britain as America's unsinkable aircraft carrier in the North Sea. Um, on the other hand, it might see it as a British trained European army with equipped with German weapons and British weapons. It's probably how it's going to end up. And in fact, there is already a European armed forces. A European task force was sent down against the Somalis after they captured 50,000 tons worth of grain. Um, the European army, as it stands, European land forces already has more helicopters than the British Army, and more vehicles than the British Army as it stands. Um, and so, if, for instance, if the Europeans all got together now, perhaps they wouldn't have as many large carriers as the Americans, although those could be built. But we would certainly have more ships and more men and more tanks. Now, the Americans are a hyperpower. They've got 50,000 Abrams main battle tanks. They've got technologies that are beyond even the Europeans can and Russians can produce. But um, the position of the United States is based on military power at the moment, hard realism, rather than the soft power that the European Union uses. Now, if we were to develop Europe into a United States of Europe, as it would be automatically become a hyperpower. I don't think it would be a rival to the United States. I mean, let me just run this by you. If you're very patriotic and you're an English person, wouldn't it be better for you to have all your rights protected under the Lisbon Treaty, to have an English Parliament, to have a Republican England, a Social Democratic England, to have the British Army as the core of the European Army, which is what it would be because we're the best we've got the best trained troops and some of the best weapons. The other ones who've got the other people who've got some of the best weapons are the Swedish, the Germans, and the French, and some of the Italian equipment's quite good as well. And all those strengths will be put together. Not only that, you have a multilingual army, and probably the main language of the army, since everybody speaks English as a second language on the continent, or will be English. And England, in a sense, already contributes most of the legislation between them. France, Germany, and England produce most of the legislation that goes into becoming our law. So we're already influencing them, and in many regards, the House of Lords deals with the European legislation. So that 75% of our laws already come from Europe. Your more flexible working hours probably come from Europe. Now, if we can build up the European armed forces, that will be a counterweight and help the Americans retreat back into a normal role for a large power as they are. And also, we'll be able to not only set the Russians at ease, but protect ourselves more from the Russians. If Russia ever went into a situation of chaos, like it did in the 1990s, because still, a quarter of Russia's economy is still run by organised crime, the Russian mafia. These are all problems, smaller problems than the Cold War, but all problems that need dealing with. And I think Russia would like to be part of a Security Council of Europe. They would feel more happy with lots of European bases on their borders rather than lots of American bases, because that really looks like American power projection. We already have massive amounts of trade. Most of Germany's trade is with Russia. Most of Europe's trade is with Russia. Soon it will. If America falls away as an economic power, which it seems to be doing, much less of our trade will be going across the Atlantic, which I think would be a sad thing. But we have to keep our ties with America.